Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 18 Strong podcast brought to you by Link Soul. I've got a incredible guest here today, a very interesting story in the world of golf. It's Kelley James. Kelley James is a musician that is performing all over the place, working with golfers, interviewing golfers, and has been ingrained in the world of golf. And so we're going to get a little more on his background, how he got into the world of golf, the ins and outs of the musician world, what's going on with his travel and his touring, and just a little more insight into him and his story. So Kelley, I want to welcome you to the 18 Strong podcast. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Sorry it was so crazy, here stay-at-home orders and quarantine. It's like the Wild West every day of my life, just trying to figure out schedules and all that. So thank you for putting up with the time changes, etc.
No worries, man. I mean, obviously it sounds like even though everybody's kind of on lockdown still a little bit, it sounds like your schedule is just as crazy as always. You're just kind of telling me a little bit about some of the interviews you've been doing with some of the golfers. Give me a little more of that story.
Yeah, I mean, as everybody knows, everybody's got their different kind of, quarantine situation, and those people who have kids, I mean, it's like that's a whole different element. I got my two little ones in there. At any moment, they could burst into this office, and the whole thing could fall apart. But schedule-wise, it's just been nuts because, as you know, we completely lost live shows. Just as a music industry, there are no quote-unquote, there's no ability for people to gather and really participate in any kind of live show. And so with that taken away, we lost 2-3 months of shows right off the bat, which, it hurts. It's meaningful for us. So right away, I went into these Zoom video performances. So we were doing live shows on Zoom for different brands, different people. I wrote 50 custom songs for Mother's Day for Feeding America. So the proceeds went for Feeding
awesome.
America. And but that was like still 50 custom songs. And then I started a podcast and have 52 episodes that I've done on that. And now we're going to go on the road and do a 70-show tour across the United States, small private shows in backyards, and we're going to donate at least 1 million meals to Feeding America through the tour. So we're just kind of stacking all that stuff up, and then you throw my family piece on. Like I said, I have the kids. During quarantine, there's no rules really now. We used to have real strict rules. Now they can just watch as much screen time as they want. They eat ice cream for breakfast. Both of them are smoking cigarettes right now. It's it's whatever they want to do. They're 4 and 6 years old.
I love it, man. So what did your tour schedule look like before all of this hit? Like, how often were you on the road? How long would you be gone? What'd that look like?
Yeah, so I mean, I used to play, 100 shows a year was kind of like our number for the last probably 5 years. But when I first started, I used to play 170 shows a year. You just stay out on tour, and you essentially, you don't come home because you got to play. Like, the dollars aren't crazy, and you got to really be out there building this thing. So it was 170. It was the most I ever played in a year. But in that 100 show a year zone is where we're at right now. So they're kind of spaced out throughout the year. April just happens to be like a big month every single year that I've been touring, and it started out with a couple shows that got canceled, and then within 2 weeks it was just like the month of March completely wiped out, the month of April completely wiped out, and when we started getting cancellations into July and August, I was like, oh God, we're in trouble. Like, this is that anxiety feeling, because the live show is probably 80-85% of the business. Like, that's the revenue, and that's the case for most musicians, is you got to be on the road. And when that's taken away, not only your ability to provide, but, your ability to go and take care of, obviously, all the people that work for you, et cetera, that's compromised. So it was crazy when it all went down, especially, like you said, being used to playing so many shows. I mean, on the golf side, we had an unbelievable April stacked up. I was doing 5 shows at the Masters. We were doing Derek Jeter's golf event in Vegas at Shadow Creek. Just a bunch of other little great things. Last year, Justin Thomas had his foundation event in April, and it's just it all got wiped out, which was kind of a bummer.
So, with this whole thing hitting, obviously you've ducked and weaved and bobbed and started some new projects. What do you see yourself taking forward into, the next year? You mentioned that you're going to be doing like a lot of backyard parties, like those kinds of smaller events, private events. Is that going to be the big shift, or are there other things that you're really going to be bringing in as well?
I mean, it comes down to, like, what are we allowed to do? I think for me, the small private show is clearly the first thing that can come back. You're talking about just the CDC really dictating, you know, a lot of the policy that's being created state to state. So it really comes down to what we're allowed to do. At this point, it's small private shows in backyards, CDC compliant. That's where we're at. I think that, you know, I'm going to do one T-box freestyle, where, you know, again, be it pro-am or some semblance of a golf tournament, and I freestyle about everybody that rolls through the T-box. So we got one of those in Vegas in a couple weeks. But it's really going to be what we're allowed to do. I think for me personally, I love the whole podcast thing. I like talking to people, and I like, you know, I just like doing like a couple of the other little projects that we've gotten into. Charity for me has always been there. I've always been focused on really like Children's Hospital and the military was kind of my two zones where we would really go all in. But at the beginning of quarantine, for me, I really wasn't aware of like truly what food insecure families go through. I kind of thought like, oh, if you don't have meals, like that must be like a third world country kind of problem. We don't have that in the United States. So we're going to go into a grocery store, we have food. I don't know, food seems cheap. McDonald's if you needed something. And then when I really got into the metrics behind it, again, as somebody who's never had to deal with it, and I saw the fact that like, oh, there's families out there. Both parents could be working, like variety of different situations. And school was the place where they would rely on a meal for their child or 2, 3, 4 children, whatever. And now that, you know, they're not going to school physically, they have no lunch. And that's a real, like, you know, cost. And if you think, like, let's just say it's $40 a day or whatever the number is for a family of 6 or however, like, that's $1,200 a month that they would, you know, for a meal. And that's a real number. Like, again, when I started to dig into the math, and then you see all the sports programs and everything that's been canceled in the summer, and that was the part for me that was just like, oh my God, like I was not aware of the severity of that situation. So that's going to be clearly a focus for me. Just you know, moving forward, I would love to really dig deep on it. Like I said, we're going to do this tour and donate at least 1 million meals. We donated 100,000 meals just through those Mother's Day songs that I did. So you know, there's just like a basic need right now that I would love to jump in on and you know, just I guess use some of the resources that I've built up over the last decade plus to solve a problem and do something meaningful.
Man, that's awesome. I had kind of the same revelation here. I live in St. Louis, Missouri, and my kids go to the public school, and that was one of the big things that the school came out and said was like, hey, for the families that need it, we're going to continue to do lunches and everything. You can drop by in the morning, swing by. You know, people had masks on, just brown bagging it, but drive by, get your stuff if you can. You know, come deliver, help out, whatever. And so that was one of the things that was like, oh man, that's like here. That's not somewhere else. That's right here in St. Louis around me. The kids that my kids go to school with. So I applaud you for doing that. That's unbelievable. You mentioned the T-Box freestyle, which is that's where I first ever saw you. I think it was Damon Goddard that had a video of you from him going up to the T-Box, and I was like, your freestyle and your ability to on the fly rip him apart. It was great, and the guys that he was playing with, and I was like that's incredible. So, but before we get into, you know, the golf stuff, I want to know just a little bit more about your musical background. Like, when did you start getting involved in music, and how did that become? Because from what I understand, that's like one of the things that really separates you in the industry is your ability to do that. And I'm sure that's not just a talent; that's a hard work and a lot of hours put in.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, you know, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a ton of work, you know, that I put in. I just don't really look at it that way because it's something that I've always done.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to say it comes easy and whatever, but like I started playing guitar when I was 12 and my parents weren't musicians. I didn't really like, I don't know, like I don't mean to demean the music side, but like music wasn't serious. It was like just a fun thing. None of my friends played music, so this guitar thing was just my little like escape as a kid. Started writing songs at 14, and there was no goal. Found a couple musicians at the school, like kind of created a band, but really I would just play guitar, and it would be a way for me to like just like F around with my friends. So it'd be like we'd be at a party or something like that, and I'd just be like this, like, and there'd be like a girl, and I'd be like. Just something like so cheesy, like Jenny, I love Jenny, I love Jenny, and I'd sing like the same thing over. Like it's nothing like insane or like there was no like it wasn't. I don't know how to describe it. There wasn't an intention to be like a rapper or make stuff up or anything like that. It was just like, oh, I just said Jenny's name in this silly little song over and over. Well, then I would like make it a little bit more complex the next party, like the next day with my buddies. And then it grew into that. So the premise was never to be like a rapper or freestyle in that way. Like that whole like hip hop cypher thing. Like that wasn't our like vibe. Like we all listened to hip hop music, but we were just fans. Like we weren't trying to be rappers, if that makes sense. And I feel like, in the generation after, and I saw it all happen, people were trying to start to rap. I was just sitting there being like, dude, Tupac is the coolest human on planet Earth. Like I could never even try to do what he does because he's so good. Notorious B.I.G., Snoop Dogg, like that whole West Coast contingent, like that was my thing growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Yep.
So I was listening to Dave Matthews. I was listening to like all grunge music, all that kind of stuff. Like that was my focal point in like the early 90s. And then that got me into like Sublime, which was like the point where everything changed for me personally, because all of a sudden in the early 90s, and what a lot of people don't understand, and you know what I'm talking about, like you had to identify with a certain type of music. You had to be hip hop, or you had to be alternative, or you had to be whatever. Like that's what you were. Like if you were country, you only listened to country.
Yeah.
You dressed country. It was like you just had to choose. You couldn't be like, oh, I listen to this, this, and this, and which is insane to think today. As I shuffle through Spotify playlists and listen to like everything on planet Earth, then you just listen to one thing. And so all of a sudden Sublime comes out, and I'm like, yo, like there's like punk in there, there's reggae in there, there's hip hop in there, there's rock in there, there's pop in there. Like it was like they're doing everything and they don't care. Like there's no rules to how they made music. They're sampling stuff, and I'm like, wow, you can like actually make music and you don't have to like fit in this genre. So I'm like, well, I like Tupac and I like Dave Matthews. And again, saying it today seems so like basic. Like, well, okay, yeah, of course you blend this out. But back then people didn't do it. So I just started playing guitar, and I'm like, well, why can't I play Tupac songs on guitar?
Yeah.
I just started playing Tupac songs. Well, why can't I take a Beatles song and put it with a Notorious B.I.G. song? And that's what I would do. So I start like that becomes like the style. And again, we use the word mashup now, or mashup kind of got created in like, I guess in the last, call it 15 years. But for me, it was just like late 90s, early 2000s, mashing a bunch of stuff up that didn't belong together. And that was always kind of the like, and still is for me, like mentally the driving force of what's interesting. Two things that just don't belong together. So I can take, again, a classic like jazz song and like, can I figure a way out to like put like Snoop Dogg in there in some way? And like, that was interesting to me. And so I thought it was interesting. Like, oh, I play guitar. Well, I'm going to bring this like freestyle rap thing in almost as a joke, to be honest with you. Like I would only do it like when something would go wrong on stage, or if I was at a party and I was just jamming acoustic, grab a guitar and start playing. And then as I started doing it in live shows, it became the focal point where I could watch a crowd and I'd be playing whatever. And then when I did the freestyle, the whole thing would go to this level. And I just remember being like, maybe that was just because it was that topic that I talked about, or maybe it was just because, and it was like, no, every single time the freestyle thing became the focal point. So I really started to make it a part of a show. As it relates to that T-Box freestyle thing you're talking about, complete accident. So for the golf fans out there, I was in Scottsdale, Arizona. I had like 4 or 5 shows over New Year's of like 2012, somewhere in that zone. Maybe it was probably 9 years ago. And Gary McCord had seen me play a few times. I had played for a bunch of golfers at that point. Charlie Hoffman was my intro into professional golf, introduced me to a bunch of dudes, a lot of pro golfers in Scottsdale. Gary McCord comes to a couple shows and he's like, hey, I want to write a song about Phil. I'm doing this charity event. And I'm like, okay, I don't know Phil, but if you help me with the lyrics, I can write whatever you want. Go to McCord's house, write a song about Phil. And he calls me that afternoon and he was like, that was awesome. Can we do one more about Freddie Couples? And I'm like, sure, whatever. Go to his house the next day before my show that night, write the song about Freddie Couples, calls me again. He's like, we do one more. Martin Keimer just won a major at that point. And he was like, I want to do one about Martin Keimer. So we have these 3 songs. I show up the next day to his event. I have a show that night. And he has to MC 60 guys hitting a single shot at Greyhawk in Scottsdale over this lake. And, it's McCord. He's making fun of people. He's so smart. So a couple guys come up, and we do the Phil song, like 10 guys in. And it, like, gets a really good response. And then I'm supposed to do Freddie Couples at, like, 25 guys in. Well, he does 4 guys, and he's like, let's do Freddie Couples now. So we do Freddie Couples. And then he's like, let's do Martin Keimer now. So he has 40 guys left to talk about and introduce. And I'm sitting there like, okay, cool, I'm done. My keys player who was with me, he packs up all his stuff. He leaves. I'm packed up. Now he goes through 5 more guys, and he's like, hey, Kelley, come back here. Can you plug in? I want you to get Pat Perez. And I'm like, well, I'm already done. Like, I don't have a Pat Perez song. Like, he's like, no, just do that freestyle thing you do. I'm like, well, so I do Pat Perez, and then I do the next guy, and then I do the next guy, and then I do the next guy. 35 guys later.
No way.
And I was thinking, like, God, that's the craziest thing I've ever done. Thank God I'll never have to do that again. So we get a call specifically from Pat Perez. I'm on this surf trip. So I'm like not really getting like reception, and I'm like all surfed out. Like, you know, you're just like in your surf mode. I do one like beginning of the year, usually why. So I'm like on my phone, and Pat Perez texts me. He's like, call me, you know. So I'm like, hey, Pat. And I'm just like I don't know. I was looking at waves or whatever. He's like, what do you charge for a show? I threw out some number. He's like, well, they'll double it. And I'm like, great. If they're doubling our show fee for normally, I'll do whatever they want. So they send over the contract. I'm on this surf trip, and I never really look at it. I just have my assistant at the time sign it. And like, I'm like, all right, whatever. I don't care. I just saw the money. So I'm like, we end up now. It's, you know, I play so many shows. I'm playing 160 shows at the time. Essentially, like, show up to a venue, and we get the day sheet, like our itinerary for the next 3 days. And I see on the thing, I turn to my tour manager. I'm like, yo, man, you messed up on the itinerary. You put 7 a.m. sound check and 9 a.m. show. You got to redo that because the band's going to get confused. 7 p.m. sound check, 9 p.m. show in Palm Springs. He's like, no, bro, you're playing on a driving range at 9 a.m. I'm like, what? I was like, who signed this? They're like, you've approved this? I'm like, oh, that was that one. Okay, who cares? Whatever. I, you know, saw the money, and I was like, great, I'll do it, you know. And so we go and we show up, and they have our full stage set up on the driving range at 7 a.m. So we sound check, and guys I had known were there. So it was like easier for me, but it was still kind of daunting. And Joe Buck was on stage with us. I know Joe, so I was able to play off him. Dustin Johnson, Fowler, all those guys were there, so I could ping them. And we did 50 minutes of like more of a like kind of MC thing, and I freestyled. I played the Phil song, which is what they want. I get off stage. The GM comes up to me, and he's like, oh, that was awesome. So your second stage is over on the first tee box. And I'm like, second stage? Like, there's no second stage. He's like, no, you know how you do your rap thing. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, well, you know, you're going to rap about all the guys like you did what Pat Perez saw, you know. And I'm like, no. That's not what I do. That was Gary McCord's thing. Like, I don't do that. And the guy hands me the tee sheet. He's like, well, you signed the contract. And he just hands me the tee sheet, like this big piece of paper. So I'm like sitting there with like this giant piece of paper, and I'm like, okay. And I signed the contract. We had deposited the money, the whole thing. I'm like, oh, God. So I go over to the first tee box, duplicate stage. My band's up there. And I'm sitting there on stage looking around like, I don't know what to do. I've never done this. There's no thing. There's no tee box freestyle. There's nothing. I have no idea. There's 2 fivesomes that come up on the first hole. First fivesome. George Clooney.
What?
Cindy Crawford was with her husband, Randy Gerber. Mike Meldman, who owns the whole thing. Phil Mickelson. And I think it was like Andy Garcia. Next fivesome comes up. Jerry Weintraub. Larry David's agent, Greg Kinnear, and I think it was like Webb Simpson or somebody like that. And they're just staring at me. And there's like a stage set up on the first tee. And I'm just like, I have just the mic in my hand, and I'm like, and the tee sheet that I like don't know. It's like I know all these people, and I'm like, my band's looking at me. They have no idea what to do. And I'm sitting here being like, this is, I legit didn't know what to do. I turned to my drummer, and I'm like, hey, just play something. Anything. Just play something. So he's like looking at me. He's like, and I'm like looking at the band. I'm like, play anything. Just whatever. So like the band guys are like, and I just start rapping. And I have no idea. Like I just go full blackout, and I just start rapping about each guy. And it was never meant to be like this like aggressive attack, because I'm not like an attack type human. Like I don't talk a lot of trash. Like that's not my thing. And I just didn't know what to do, so I just started like not ripping on people, but like, you know, okay,
like a roast kind of.
Exactly. And so, yeah, and that happened. Those 10 people, and they got like off the tee box down the fairway, and I'm like, okay, like what do we do? Next fivesome rolls up, and I'm just like, I guess we have to do this all day. Like, okay, here we go. 6 hours later, we finished, and in my head, I'll never forget. I'm like, whoa. Thank God I won't have to do that again. You know? And now, you know, what was it? 5 years later, we were doing it Wednesday of a PGA Tour event. I've done it at the American Express in Palm Springs, Safeway Open. I mean, LA Open, Tiger's deal in at Riv. Like now it's like a thing. Right? It was never meant to be a thing, but accidentally became a thing.
Now, when you do like a bigger show, then how does the freestyle play out there? Because obviously a lot of people are coming to see that piece of it too. So I imagine you're playing some of your songs, you're mixing it all in.
Totally, yeah, it's all woven in, and like the part of our um the part of our show that like is just like is the repeatability factor is that there is no real set list. There is no format. There is no like this is how this show has to be done. Like I love the fact that like my band can go on stage. I can just look at the audience. I know like enough going into it and I've done all the research, but in the moment it's like being a quarterback in a 2-minute drill. Like we're just going to audible our way through this. Like whatever it takes to get the job done, that's what we're going to do. And so if it's freestyle right out of the gate, or I could do 5, 6 freestyles. I could do 2. I could freestyle about the clouds. I could freestyle about a bunch of different people. Bam, bam, bam. It just depends what I feel like they need at that given moment. And that need changes every 10 seconds. Like, cause I'm just looking the whole time like, all right, sax solo or cover song or original or break it down. Do I need to tell a story? Do I need to freestyle about, whoever? So it's literally like this living, breathing organism that like we take pride on the fact that like no show is ever the same, and that no matter what, like we are doing what's right for the moment and the crowd, not this pre-planned thing that we kind of came up with backstage an hour before the show. Like this is our set list. So that's the strategy.
So it seems to me like you have really ingrained yourself in the world of golf. Obviously, is golf something that you've always played, loved? Is that something that grew as you got more involved in this environment, or how did that all?
I always thought golf sucked.
I did too when I was younger.
Like I truthfully and I'm like looking at the little like reflection in the screen right now as I go like crazy golf flex with the Cypress and the Augusta.
Yeah, right,
like,
exactly.
Yeah, golf sucks. Play both, But I grew up playing football, baseball, basketball. None of my friends played golf. Like, and none of them played music. So I don't know. Golf was just so boring, and it was crazy because when I first started doing stuff for the PGA Tour, I didn't even like golf. I didn't watch golf. I wouldn't go to the tournaments. I'd get offered to play in these pro-ams. I'd always say no. For years and years, I'd say no. And I would like laugh at like, dude, golf's just so dumb. I just like really like the dudes. Like they were just great dudes. Like again, starting with Charlie Hoffman all the way down. Like his friend group, like at that time, and then all the guys I met, you go from like Hoffman to Ricky Barnes, Colt Knost, like all the way down like this like lineage of just like unbelievable human beings. Like Justin Thomas, like, and every year it just gets replenished with dudes. Matthew Wolf, like I haven't spent a ton of time with Matt, but like we've done interviews and we've interacted. Like I already know that dude's like a great guy, and so for me it was just about hanging out with like great humans as opposed to this sport. I've obviously found like a true love for the game in the last 5 years, and played a ton of golf since. But I was never into it. Like I always thought golf was stupid, to be honest with you. And like I just like I don't know. Like my parents played, and I was like, dude, it's not a real sport. But now I have like a completely different appreciation for it, and how difficult the sport is, what the sport teaches you, the camaraderie that comes with it. Like there's nothing else that my father, who just turned 75, and I could do together in any kind of activity where things would be equal. Like I would beat him at every other thing on planet Earth except for golf. And that little wily 75-year-old can still get me once in a while. And the handicap system's unbelievable. It's something you can do super late in life. Even today, if you gave me hours, I would rather surf than go play golf. But golf is like a unifier. Like surfing is an individual thing. Like you're out there, like, yeah, you can have buddies and you can all be in the water, but you're not doing it together. I'm not on anybody's team. There's like nothing better than a great match in golf, as you know, like anybody that's played. And I would say this, you don't need to play for crazy money, and you don't need to be good at all. As long as the handicap system is in somewhat of like a zone, and I can play against Tiger Woods head up for $10,000 a hole, and mathematically it's fair. Now, there's a bunch of other variables that come in, but that's the beauty of the handicap system. There's no other sport like that. So that, for me, is like that special factor that I've found in the last 5 years. But prior to that, I thought golf was the dumbest thing on planet Earth.
What's your game look like these days?
I'm okay. Like, I'm okay. The beauty is, and I'll give you like, you know, a good couple name drops here. I'm good enough to go and like, I used to be not good enough to go play like a casual round or a semi-competitive round with like a tour player or just somebody who's a great golfer. So again, here we go, name drop city, but just to give you the, the vibe. So Carlos Ortiz and Sebastian Munoz, we played Pebble Beach last week. Two unbelievable guys. Both are having like such great, last couple year runs on the PGA Tour. And I'm good enough to go to Pebble Beach, tee it up from the back tees with them, and play. Now, I shot 90, but I hit enough good shots to like play the game without looking like a complete idiot. And I used to look like a complete idiot. I mean, like there'd be days where it'd just be like, I don't know how to swing a golf club, but I'm going to shoot 140. And that's, as any golfer out there knows, when you're a 15 to a 25 handicap is the worst feeling in the world, especially when you play a challenging golf course. And if you have a bad miss, like if you're a snap hook guy, I was a snap hook guy forever. And now all of a sudden you're in this tree line, you're like, oh God, I got no chance. Or you go play, in the desert and it's like, you have to be straight. You can't do it. And anxiety inducing. So, now I can go tee it. I played again. Here's the second name drop. Played yesterday with Steph Curry up in Northern California,
Jeez.
and he's a +1. He's really a +2, but he plays to a +1, and it's like that dude can play. And so my ability now to go tee it and not look like an idiot and feel like an idiot is I'm in a better place. And the cool part, like I think where a lot of golfers really start to enjoy the game is before I would hit my patented snap hook off the tee, and then freak out. Like I'd be like, well, I'm gonna make a 12 on this hole. Like I don't have the mental capacity or the game or anything to like go hit the next shots. Like I'm just all messed up. Now I can hit a bad shot, and in my head I'm like, okay, we hit a bad shot, we can recover and we can make bogey. We can make par maybe. And if I hit two bad shots in a row, I'm like, okay, that's fine. We can make bogey now. Like, let's go. I can hit this 210-yard 5-iron and just stick this. It's possible. Where before that was not possible. Where before I'd snap hook and I'd be like, hole's over. Let's go home. I just want to, do something else other than this game. So that's kind of where the golf game's at. I'm at like a 9 index, and that's kind of the little zone I play.
I'd say 90 from the back tees at Pebble. That's a pretty serious game. Plus, knowing the guys that you're out there playing with, the competitiveness that you have out there. I mean, that can be an intimidating thing. Let me ask you this: is regarding like golf and music, what similarities or what have you taken from kind of your music career that's maybe helped you in golf or vice versa?
So many similarities. I mean, again, finesse is like a word that comes to mind for me where it's like you just need to be like very conscious of like the effort that you're putting in, because sometimes the amount of effort doesn't translate to success. In that a golf swing doesn't need to be complicated. No different than playing a guitar. Like guitar has to be graceful. Like the harder you hit the string doesn't mean, and there's no correlation with how much better it sounds. Like if anything, it needs to be the reverse. So in terms of touch and feel and being connected to like this tool, guitar, golf club, very, very, very similar. Also, just like kind of the creativity that you have to have, as a golfer is the same way with music. Like you got to figure out, and I know specifically for me, like the freestyle, like sometimes the freestyle might start great and then drift over into like, okay, what are we saying now? This is terrible. And you got to get it back. And you have no choice in that moment but to get it back. There is no like, oh, pause, let me restart. And that's golf. You hit that bad shot off the tee, you got to figure out how to get back and score. So, I would say those two things for sure. And then, just in terms of like music is tempo, music is feel, music is get so masterful with this tool and then go into a higher level of consciousness where it becomes natural and now you're feeling this thing. Golf's the same way. Get really good with this tool and then now it's time to feel. Like, when you're 52 yards out, that's all feel, that's all visual, that's all like getting back to, something more than back forth. So there's a ton of similarities as it relates to music, and they pop out at weird times for me where I'm like, okay, it's windy or I'm nervous and I'm super quick. It's like tempo, like let's get back, and all I think of like a Tupac beat, like or a Dr. Dre beat, and I'm just like, okay, here we go.
Do you feel like you get more nervous, or do you still get nervous on stage? And do you get more nervous on the golf course, or more nervous when you're up performing?
4,000 times more nervous on the golf course.
Really?
Oh my God. I still get nervous on stage every show. Like I'll just be like, okay, I don't know. Like I have maybe like a fatalist kind of mentality where like I legitimately believe it's not going to work tonight. Like if I had a show tonight, I'd be like, oh, this is the night where it doesn't work. Like this is the night where it all falls apart. I don't know why. I try to get out of it, but like, and I played, I don't know, God, probably 1,800 shows, like maybe more. I don't know. I completely lost count, but like every night when I play music, I'm like, this is the night that they figure me out that I don't know how to do this thing. Like, I don't know. I just feel like I'm going to forget, or like it's just going to be terrible and garbage. And so I like get myself up into like this psyched up stage. Golf is the same way. I mean, oh man, there's just tee boxes that even just thinking about them right now, I'm like, oh God, like, I mean, this one right here is a nervous shot like that. You know, anybody who's been up to Pebble Beach knows how special that whole thing is. The experience at Cypress is ridiculous. But your first tee shot, you are hitting right next to the clubhouse, right next to the pro shop window. All the caddies that are waiting for the next groups to come up, they're waiting. Everybody who's driving their car up is watching. Like, you are right there. There is no hiding. And you hit over 17-mile drive, over a hedge. If you block it right, you are on the driving range. And so now your caddy has to go look for your ball, number one. Number two, wave down everybody on the driving range back, stop hitting so this donkey show can go and, you know, and hit another bad shot. Or if you snap hook it left, you're in the trees. I mean, there's just so many elements that are gnarly. And it's so, like, you compound it by the fact that, like, it's just so special to be there and play. So you're just, like, all jacked up. That's probably the most nervous I get on the tee, where I'm like, dear God, just get the ball somewhere out there where my caddy doesn't have to walk through the driving range and stop everybody from hitting balls so I can go hit another bad shot.
When you get that nervousness before a show, do you feel like that actually kind of helps and fuels you? I mean, do you feel like if you don't have that, then something's wrong?
100%. I mean, I know now on the show, I know how to repurpose the adrenaline hit, which is butterflies, nerves, whatever, that feeling in your stomach. I know how to repurpose that now. I didn't at the beginning of my career, and you end up playing fast, or you end up just doing stuff, and it comes across. But now I know how to use that as like the fuel to like do a great performance. Like I know how to like take it all in, where I feel the adrenaline hit, and then I just repurpose that energy into like this like very controlled flow. And now I have the fuel and the vibe and the energy to go do what I do. On the golf course, I freak out, and I just, it's like, there's no repurpose of that energy. And I haven't figured out how to flip the brain over into it. I try, like, literally, I'll be like, you know, before I do a freestyle, which takes like the highest level of like that mental drive and like push, I'll like ask for 2 random topics or a couple random topics from the crowd. And there have been times where I've been on the tee box so nervous. You know, again, playing in a pro-am, again, here's another name drop, you know, like teeing it up with Tiger, doing, you know, all these, there's crazy things, you know, playing at Augusta, whatever. Name drop.
I'm keeping a tally on my side.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If when this gets edited, can we just have a ticker like ding, 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 47 name drops? Just trying to make for better stories.
I love it, man.
But I'll literally hold the club and just be like this in my head, like pretending like I'm doing a practice routine that doesn't exist. But I'll be like this. I'll be like, in my head, I'm saying, give me 2 random topics. All right. And I'll like go through my show mode to try to get my body to repurpose the energy like I do when I play music on the tee box. It never works. So I usually block it out of bounds or snap hook it into a bush.
So is this something you've talked with a lot of the tour players that you've either interacted with? I know, like you were just saying, you've been interviewing a lot of those guys for the podcast, and I'm curious to hear more about the interviews that you've done. But like, is that something you talk to them about too? Like, how do they take that nervous energy and do the same thing, you know, like you do with your craft?
The one common thing that like over and over and over and over and over, and only because it's so foreign to them, is Ryder Cup. Or any team play, for that matter. President's Cup, Ryder Cup, but specifically Ryder Cup. And, I mean, you talk to the best in the world, and you ask them about the first tee at the Ryder Cup, there's not one guy that's not like, I blacked out. Like, Again, here's tallied up. Ba-ding! Interviewed Brooks Koepka 2 days ago, and he was at the Ryder Cup, and he grabbed the wrong tee out of his bag. So he has like super long tees for like certain shots that he hits, and then he has these normal tees. And so he teed it up with the wrong tee, and the ball was like noticeably higher off like the club face for him than he would ever hit. And he's like, I was so nervous to put this tee in the ground. I put it in the ground and I stepped back, and then I realized that I'm like this far off. And he's like, I was like so overcome by the moment and nerves and like everything and thinking about the people. He's like, in my head, I'm like, I'm not reteeing this ball. There's no way. I don't care what happens. I'm not going to be the guy that has to lean back down, fix my ball. Maybe the ball falls off, whatever. So he's like, I just lean back and I just hit this shot and just prayed that I made contact. And it's like, he's like one of the best golfers of the generation. And that's going through his head.
Yeah, right.
So these dudes, I mean, they feel it for sure, especially when they get in, zones where, they're just not comfortable and it's a different kind of thing, be it a Ryder Cup or other team play or just a big moment. I mean, they're humans and they feel all that stuff, not like we do, but they definitely get in spots where they're like, oh God,
Well, speaking of them getting in the zone, before we started recording, you were talking about the difference that you've noticed in some of these guys, because you interviewed them twice, once kind of quarantine time and now once in go mode. What was the differences that you saw there?
It was crazy, and it was something I actually didn't expect. We're doing this project right now for Travelers, for the Travelers Championship, and it's a series of interviews. So we did 5 the week, prior to this tournament week. So prior, guys in quarantine essentially, and then Tuesday of tournament week. Prior, the guys like da 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 this da 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 da, and it was just a great run of interviews. Like great dudes, great run of interviews. Arguably, like more media trained, seasoned, guys on the week of, and they were like full dialed in. Like just you could see it, and like they had been to the course that day. They're all in. They're not wearing t-shirts and messing around. They're in their course clothes. They're playing clothes, and it's tournament week. It's Tuesday. They're back in the mode. They're back in the zone. And the interviews were very like, shoo, shoo. It wasn't like this, and it was like very apparent to me and really cool to see. Obviously, it didn't make for the best interviews for the most part, but very cool to see them like back in the zone. And those guys, I mean, the focus, the commonality, I would say, with any like, super, super successful human. And again, tally up the name drops. Here we go. On this podcast, because we were in quarantine and nobody had anything to do, we got Steph Curry, Justin Thomas, Fowler, Spieth, Michael Phelps, Larry Fitzgerald, like roll down the list. All of them, every single one. And it was like really shocking to me. Their ability to like truly fully focus on one thing and never deviate is what makes them who they are. And the only defining factor is how long are you willing to look at this little hole that's just sitting right there and never take your focus off that little tiny goal, the little grain of sand out in the distance. Are you willing to walk every day and never lose focus of this grain of sand, even though 100 things are coming at you and the world doesn't want you to get to that little grain of sand out in the distance? Are you willing to do it every day? And most people aren't. Somebody like Michael Phelps, he was. He was willing to spend 4 years to gain 1/100th of a second, 4 years of training to essentially get 1/100th of a second. Like that's how it nets out. And every single decision in his life, everything that he did, everything that came into his body, every person that he talked to, every hour of sleep that he got, every rep that he did was based on that one little grain of sand for 4 years to get 1/100th of a second. Like that's greatness, that's focus, that's what all these guys have. Like when they're in that zone, there's nothing else that matters in the world. Kelly Slater, there is nothing else that mattered in the world to that guy except for winning world titles. So whatever somebody said to him, he took through the filter of like, will it help me win a world title? Mm-hmm. If the answer was no, if the answer was yes, in. What am I going to put in this cup? Is it going to help me win a world title? I'll drink it. Nope, I'm not drinking it. Every decision. Is this phone going to help me in social media win a world title? Yes or no? And that for decades. I mean, that's those guys. Like that's what they do, and that was so like the commonalities of guys, multi-sport all the way down. That focus, that dedication, that ability to create a goal and use that goal as a filter for everything in life. Who are my friends? Does it help me be a champion? Does it help me win a major? Yes or no? Boom, 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 every day. And that was just the coolest part for me to see.
It's like a superhuman strength, man. It's just
Really?
so impressive.
I
Who
mean,
of all the people that you've played golf with, you've interviewed, like who's one person that stands out, maybe even a surprise that like you know, like Michael Phelps, you know, like, okay, this guy is the greatest of all time. Kelly Slater, greatest of all time. Who's somebody that you've come across and either interviewed or really gotten to know personally, and you're like, that dude is insanely special, and it was just a surprising and very cool experience.
yeah, I mean, again, there's been so many, like I said, I've done 52 interviews on this podcast. I've played with so many different people, and just been around so many different athletes and impressive humans. Again, name drop. You know, what's crazy is that like anybody who's gotten to any semblance of the top of their industry, there's always a reason. Like there's no accidents. There's just no accidents. You can't, be it music, sports, business, like there's just the best thing I can say is there's no accidents. I can go industry by industry and sport by sport. We could stay here for hours, and I could tell you about, again, that focus that we talked about initially. But there's just no accidents. I don't know. That's the best way that I can describe it. It's just about having a goal, having an attention, or having an intention, and going after it with so much vigor. In terms of like the surprising part, there's two like young women that like really like impress me. And just because I just respect what they do just as humans, and then what they've accomplished in their respective industries and what the trajectory looks like for both of them. Actually, both broadcasters, and I had them on, but Sam Ponder and Amanda Balionis. And they work so hard. Sam has kids, and she's like charged up this mountain that like truthfully you might be able to argue no woman has been able to do, and it's just so impressive to watch how she's done it at her age with the gracefulness that she does it, and to navigate these like little environments. Like Amanda, super young, she works her tail off. Like her prep work, nobody knows how hard that girl works off camera. Like people are like, oh, is she fed all this stuff? Like sure, she's fed stuff, but like I've watched her prep, and she puts in a ridiculous amount of time in her broadcast prep. And she's the second woman and the youngest woman ever to broadcast the Masters. She's put in like the most important spots for CBS in the most important moments. And now with their whole talent change on the CBS golf broadcast, like she's going to be top of the top for the next decades. I mean, she's that good. So I would say those two have like really impressed me because there's no precedent. Nobody's done what they've done. Amanda wasn't a pro golfer. Like she's come into this world and she's done such a good job. She's respected by all the players. She's respected by the audience, and she puts in the work to do it. Sam Ponder, it's unbelievable what she's done. Her position on NFL Sunday Countdown is, it was Chris Berman's spot for 20 years, and then she's just thrust right into the spotlight. Everybody probably wanted her to fail, thought she was going to fail, and she proved herself, and she proved herself every single year all the way through. So I would say, like, off the top of my head, like, those two really, really impress me. Because stereotypically, and if you just look at the infrastructure of the climate that they're succeeding in, it's not really based. 25 years ago, it was not set up for a woman to do these things. It just wasn't. And for them to be able to do it in the way that they've done it, that's super, super impressive for me. Not to demean any athletes, but, golf is golf to a certain extent. Like, if you win on the golf course, you win. They don't care. As long as that ball goes in the hole, it doesn't matter who you are, what you do. That can't be said so much for, their rise in media, which, again, is this living, changing organism that they've had to navigate and have done such an unbelievable job doing it. Number one. Number two, have done it with, like, ultimate grace. Like, they took no shortcuts. They, have never done anything that would, be looked at in a negative light. They've just maintained who they are as humans, and they've continued to execute every single day. Again, eye on one goal. Everything that comes in gets put through that filter. Or how many days in a row are you willing to do that? And that's going to determine greatness. And it's pretty simple. It's a math equation for the most part. If you have a certain level of talent, it comes down to your focus on that goal and what you're willing to give up and push away because it doesn't help you achieve that goal.
It's funny how, like you said, it is that simple, but we let so many other extraneous factors get in our way, no matter what we're doing, whether that's your golf game, whether that's your fitness, whether that's your diet, your music, all of that stuff. What's next for Kelley James music? Like, what's the big goal for you? I mean, obviously you've accomplished so many things in the realm that you're in, and the people that you're presenting for and doing your music for, and the events and people you're working with. What's next for you, man?
I mean, I would say I chose the music path for a very specific reason. It was the lifestyle. I just love to be creative. I loved to be my own boss. I love to do whatever I wanted, to be honest with you. With that said, I worked, super, super, super hard at this craft, at the business, at all these things. So it's about continuing that lifestyle and being able to play music for people, make people smile, having fun, getting to be with my friends on stage, getting to travel and meet, new people, be with people all the time. Like, I like that. And then the question is, like, what does the business look like in 10 to 15 to 20 years? Can I bring the show load down from 100 to 60, something like that, which I would love, 50 to 60? And then can I do the other things that I like to do, be a podcast? I have a ton of just like business things that I'm involved in, and can I flesh that out and make those a little bit more of a focal point for me personally? So I think it's a combination of like still playing shows and figuring out how to do that for like the long term, and then all the other things that I like, be it podcast, be it, the other business ventures, and, again, the charity piece, like how much impact can I have with all the stuff that I've been given? What can I do with that? And how can I leverage, the last 12, 13 years of my life into something bigger than me, into something that's really meaningful and impactful. So that's kind of like the vision on a macro level without getting into details. I'd like to be a better golfer. I'd like to surf more. Obviously, want to spend more time with my family at any given moment. But that's kind of the plan for the most part.
Very cool. Hey, man, I know you have a very busy schedule. I have just a couple quick questions to finish up with here that we ask everybody that comes on the show. So first one, Caddyshack or Happy Gilmore?
I'm a Happy Gilmore guy just because I grew up in that generation. I think Adam Sandler's just a genius, and that was like one of the first, Billy Madison into Happy Gilmore, Waterboy, that whole style of comedy is just awesome. I love Caddyshack, but the one-liners from Happy Gilmore are probably more like sentimental to me than Caddyshack, just because I watched Caddyshack so much later.
For sure. All right, this one I'm going to ask you for two answers. Walk-up song to the tee box. First one is what overall song would you pick? Second one is, what's the best Kelley James song that's appropriate for a walk-up?
It would have to be, like, again, probably early 90s, probably West Coast rap. I'd probably have to go with the Tupac song. And then the Kelley James walk-up song would have to be the freestyle. Like, you got to get the moment. There is no song. It's about me being on the mic, messing with you, just being like, all right, let's go. That's the moment. That's what I love the most, is doing that for people and seeing them months later. And I do so many of them that a lot of it kind of goes in and out of my head. But when people will like mention like, oh man, and you said this about my, my socks and my snap hook, and I'm like, I do remember that. That was a terrible snap hook, by the way. But it was, I would say the freestyle on the tee box would be my walk-up song. Nothing recorded, only freestyle off the top.
Best answer you could have given, definitely. All right. If you could play 18 holes of golf with anyone in the world, and obviously I know you've played with a lot, but with one person, who would it be and where are you going to play?
So
past or present.
Past or present.
Yep.
Well, let's just go present to make it easy. I feel like everybody puts Tiger in their group. Again, I already told you, got to play with him at Farmers Insurance Open. it's hard not to say Tiger just because it's just so unbelievable. But we're gonna if Tiger wasn't involved or he wasn't available that day, I would want to play golf with. Let's do this. I want to play golf with Jay-Z, Eminem, and Snoop. And I want to play Cypress with them. And I want to be on Snoop's team. So if things went wrong, we could just get lost in a little wonderland.
Right,
Like,
right.
This is great. Who cares that we're losing?
That might be the most dynamic foursome we've had mentioned on the show. I love it.
And it's legal in California.
That's right.
NorCal's super liberal. I mean, we wouldn't do it at Cypress, maybe before the round.
And maybe after too. Awesome, man. Kelley, I can't thank you enough for coming on, taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know you've got a lot going on, so this was really fun to get more of your background, get to know your story, and kind of see the whole progression of how this has happened, man. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it, and I got to go take the knives and cigarettes out of my toddler's hands that I'm sure they have at this point because it's quarantine and there are no rules now.
That's right. That's right. All right, man. Thanks again. Talk to you soon.
See you, homie.